let's get into myth number 4, nature will look after itself. And we have Professor Michael-Shawn Fletcher, who's the Associate Dean of Indigenous at the Faculty of Science, University of Melbourne, Director Research Capability for the Indigenous Knowledge Institute, in the School of, sorry, this is all written in a strange way, but anyway, he's got lots of titles, Associate Dean, and also the Director of Research Capabilities with the School of Geography, Earth and Atmospheric Sciences at the University of Melbourne. He's in hot demand, including the book that I mentioned before lunch as one of the co-authors, and that was very well received at Writers' Festival on the weekend. Michael-Shawn Fletcher is a descendant of the Wiradjuri, is a geographer interested in the long-term interactions between humans, climate, disturbance, vegetation, landscapes in the Southern Hemisphere, and I'm really looking forward to how you respond to this myth number 4, nature will look after itself. Thank you.
Thanks, Cathy, and thanks, everyone. Whoa, okay, I won't do it. First I'd like to recognise or acknowledge that we're on Wiradjuri country, and it's great to see Uncle Dave again after a little bit of a break. Recognising that this land was never ceded. I pay my respects to elders present, past and future. So I'm dealing with this particular myth, which I would argue is one of the most harmful myths that pervade the Australian psyche, Australian mentality. I'd say it's a myth. Woven in this myth is a myth that underpins the founding document of non-Aboriginal Australia, and which paved the way for one of, if not the largest acts of larceny, land theft, ever to have occurred on Earth, the theft of Aboriginal land. So I'll take you through this. My motive here, I know this is an urban conference, but I like to get back to first principles. I just want to bust wide open this myth, including things like wilderness, okay, and give you an understanding of where these myths come from, how damaging they are, and what path forward we might have. Now, as is my wont, I've got about 400 slides here. I'll get through what I can, but just sit down, hold on, and we'll see where we go. These are all partners, okay, that have informed my work through time, okay, both institutional and, more importantly, Aboriginal organisations that I have worked with and continue to work with. Okay, first of all, there's a myth that science is objective. It fundamentally is not. It's a human pursuit rooted in cultural bias. Okay, yet scientists wander around parading the notion that everything we do is completely objective. Right, and a way of exposing that myth is this amazing paper last year in PNAS, quite an esteemed journal, which gave different scientists from different cultural backgrounds and different settings the same set of data, and they all came up with different conclusions. Yeah. Science is dependent upon your cultural standing, the initial questions you ask, okay, that constrains the possibility of answers and the kind of information you get back. So let's not throw away science, but let's recognise its deeply cultural standpoint. And that's just about every concept that you hold dearly to is a subjective concept. It's one that Deborah Rose Bird captures really well in this amazing book, Reports from a Wild Country, an ironic title, okay, about the Western epistemology. All right, it's a great quote. The self sets itself within a hall of mirrors. It mistakes its reflection for the world. It sees its own reflection endlessly, talks endlessly to itself, and not surprisingly, finds continual verification of itself and its worldview. This monologue masquerading as conversation, masturbation posing as productive interaction, it is a narcissism so profound that it purports to provide a universal knowledge when in fact its violent erasures are universalising its own singular and powerful isolation. Okay, so I want to try and bust this open a little bit, okay? This is all about perspective. Hands up if you know what this building is. Can someone give it a name? It's not leaning. Okay? But it is. The way you look at something dictates the problems you see and the way you go about solving those problems. And we are all looking from a perspective. So let's look at this notion of wilderness, okay? This paper here by Watson and others declaring the last remaining wildernesses on Earth. using a computer model, therefore it must be objective, okay? Despite the fact that their inputs into this computer model are things like roads, railways, nighttime lights, okay? It identifies those areas and nullifies as wilderness, yeah? So then it identifies places like this, not working, the desert in Australia. Desert's a pejorative in itself. The desert in Australia, a part of which is Madu country. Let's have a look at Madu country. It's anything but a desert. You know what you're doing in Madu country? You can have a great feed, yeah? The painting there in the middle is just this phenomenal painting by Madu women of their hunting tracks and their burning areas, okay? Showing an intricate association and knowledge of country, okay? That was based on maintaining landscape at various stages of recovery, meaning that you have multiple different resources that are common to those stages of recovery. You work smarter, not harder. There's this myth, and I'd love to tackle this one, but it's not in the urban thing, that Aboriginal people just wandered around, probably leg up with a spear in their hand, and shit just fell in their lap, all right? Oh, there's a goose, might eat that. In no way did they carve or create anything. Yeah, for 65,000 years, we had no agency in our landscape to create the things that we need. Yeah, it was a wilderness. So let's unpack this. What happens when you turn this country into a wilderness, when you remove people? Well, what happens is the bottom plot. Madu managed to get back on country, parts of country, and they set about doing what they do, caring for country, right? So the upper graph is a period of 10 years showing area at different stages of post-fire recovery. The bottom one is unmanaged. Large, infrequent, catastrophic wildfires. Rings a bell, doesn't it? Yeah. Lots of low-intensity fires. In Madu country, there were 76 fires over this period. There were 4 in unmanaged country. Biological diversity or regrowth diversity was double on Madu country. Okay, this wilderness is valued for its biodiversity. It's biodiversity that is dependent on Madu caring for that country. So it's not only just not a wilderness, it is arguably an archetypal cultural landscape, or anthrome as the Yanks are starting to call it now, okay? This is not a wilderness, and to call it a wilderness disempowers people, okay? But it actively prevents a barrier to mob trying to get back on country to do what they know needs to be done, because it's a wilderness. Nature looks after itself, okay? It's an absolute myth. So what do we know? There's lots of sources of information. I'll take you through what I do and show you some scary graphs. But, you know, we have pictures. Okay, this is not long after mob walked off country in Central Australia. Spinifex, Demeter, okay, grass. What's it turned into? Saltbush. It's basically forest in this country, right? Paintings, we had Eugene von Gerard, okay? This is Budge Bim, or what people call Mount Eccles or Lake Surprise, okay? Then in the 1800s and now. Same thing in Buchan. Okay, and I'll show you some empirical data here. Eugene von Gerard. We have quotes like this, okay, by this white fella sailing into Port Phillip Bay looking at Bunurong country, Bunurong country. The country here is, these people, you've got to think, it's an English fella who's sailing the world. You'd think they would have seen a thing or two. They know what pastures are. Pastures are landscapes maintained for animals, right? Or that have high herbivore content. We know that this area left alone as a forest, right, turns into forest. So what did he see? The country here is enchantingly beautiful. Extensive rich plains around with gently sloping hills in the distance, all thinly wooded, having the appearance of an immense park. The grasses, flowers and herbs that cover the plains are of every variety that can be imagined and present such a lovely picture of what is evidently intended by nature to be one of the richest pastoral communities in the world. It's a big claim, yeah? Okay, but it's nature. So we're left with what philosophers will call the Cheshire Cat's grin, right? This echo of the past. We are constantly battling in science here the notion that this is a wilderness and it's all natural. And what the question, there's a in-power balance, there's a balance in science, right? Where if you ask a question, there's a burden of proof required to disprove that question. So the position that you start in automatically has a more superior position. If you were to work this around and say, well, this is a cultural landscape, prove to me it was natural, it becomes very difficult to eliminate people. If you say this is a natural landscape, prove that it was people, it becomes very hard to invoke people. There's a power imbalance from the very position of asking a question, which is about perspective. Okay? And that perspective underpins terra nullius. If you look at the 4 ways in international and British law that land can be acquired, you either inherit it. I don't think this was an inheritable land for the royal family. You either purchase it. I don't think disease blankets really counts. You either conquer it, but there's very specific rules around conquering. When the British conquered India, they were required to incorporate local law into governing that place. Uncle Dave, many local laws around here? No, exactly. But you can take it if it's unoccupied, if it's a terra nullius. And it's a terra nullius if you consider that Aboriginal people aren't human, which was the underpinning philosophy of the main science at the time that all the scientists were in, eugenics, right? So dehumanised, robbed of agency, land stolen, all on this myth that what people arrived into was a natural landscape. Even to the point where in the New York Times, or whatever it was, I've blurred the faces because we don't show our deceased, kindred of Stone Age men discovered on Antarctic Island, Tasmanian Aboriginal people. Yeah, and even until very recently, there were people who thought grave robbing was okay. There are buildings at the University of Melbourne named after grave robbers who would just rob fresh and old Aboriginal graves to conduct anatomical research. You don't do that to humans, okay? You don't do that to other humans. You do that to things that people or things that you consider subhuman or less than you. What do we know about occupation? I'll hold on tight here because I've got to scoot through. People came, okay, around about 65,000+ years ago, more than 3,000 generations, right? Okay, I know 3rd-generation farmers in this country who think the land's theirs and it's always been theirs, right? We know that at least for 1.4 million years, people have been using fire. Homo sapiens are 200,000 years old. So this is Australopithecines, okay? Right through the human evolution, we have been a fire organism, okay? Altering fire the way that occurs in a landscape, but it also locked the energy potential of food to power the evolution of this very energy-demanding thing in our head. It is the key tool that allowed us to develop the largest cranial capacity to body size ratio of any organism on Earth. And it's apparently made us so smart. Even Homo sapiens, anyone know what that means? The wise human. And we've split ourselves off into sapien now, have you noticed that? We're really wise. Okay, and not only that, it changes the way that you use your brain. Okay, this is conversations with quasi-traditional mob in Africa, okay? During the day, you complain a lot, talk about economics. At night, you can't go out hunting. You're sitting around a fire. Who's been camping here? Yeah? Who's been camping without a fire? You're in bed pretty quick, aren't you? Right? I sat around a fire till 2 o'clock in the morning, even without a beer. Yeah? Talking stories, doing this sort of stuff, exploring this, right? Fire. Okay? And it changed our physiology fundamentally, right? So here, when the British got here, it was full. It wasn't terra nullius, it was terra completus. And all of these fire regimes are in part or fully anthropogenic, right? This is a pyrogeography of Australia by Brett Murphy and others. So what do we know? Okay, let's have a look. This is some data. Okay, this is what I do. I drill holes into the ground. That there is 270,000 years of history. That's the land bridge, okay? Red means you can cross, blue means you can't cross, from mainland Australia to Tasmania. Okay, we had a core from this lake just here that managed to record 270,000 years of landscape history. We know at least people got here 65,000 years ago up around the Kimberley or across the north of Australia. They weren't around to probably take advantage of that land bridge, right? But we know by 50,000 years, Aboriginal people were all over the continent, at least. And immediately upon that land bridge exposing, you start to see archaeology in Tasmania, right? So people were there, moving across with the lowering of the sea level. Then what happens? Okay, now this is where I get a little bit scientific. Poaceae is the fancy word for grass. If there's another thing other than fire that humans depend on, is grass. Okay, we are a savanna organism. All of the foods we eat today, you know, barley, wheat, maize, corn, all that stuff, millets, are all grasses. The food we feed our hamburgers, it's all grass. Even our chicken, it eats grass. We are fundamentally a grass organism, okay? And the tool we used to promote grass, and still do, is fire, right? So what happens? That's standard deviation. So apparently in statistics, as soon as you get over 2 standard deviations, you're in a completely different population. You're in something new. As soon as people arrive, there's more grass in that landscape than there has been for the previous 250,000 years. Yeah? And those little ups and downs of the grass are ice ages, right? This is how far this is. There's ice age, down to not ice age, down to not ice age. In the not ice age periods, rainforests occupied this area. What happened when this ice age finished? Okay. Previously, rainforests would have jumped in, but what do we get? We get a brand new ecosystem. And what does that ecosystem need? Fire. Okay, it's button grass moorland for anyone who's been to Tasmania. It's that treeless stuff, right? So this, and guess where this is? It's in the middle of the southwest Tasmanian wilderness World Heritage Area. Okay, this is not a wilderness. Talked about that. Right, so what happens when you take this away? Okay, here's a place up in the northwest, just at the top end of the Tarkine, okay? The next big wilderness in Tasmania, right? What happens? This is rainforest trees. We drilled into them using dendro, right? Dendro, like tree rings. When did they establish? We know, unfortunately, George Augustus Robinson reported that in 1836 there were no Aborigines left in Tasmania, except for the slaves, right? There were no Aborigines living free lives left in Tasmania. They were all shipped off, okay? So there's an unfortunate marker, we can say complete disruption of cultural management. What happens? Within a decade or two, you get an explosion of rainforest trees. And what was there before? Grasses, okay? And the pollen record, I've just, for expedience, you can look at the paper if you want. It's actually not unpublished now. This is old, it's 2 years old. Published 2 years ago. Okay, so there were grasses, rainforest took off immediately upon the removal of Aboriginal people from this landscape. Okay, and the work we've done now shows that this was open for at least 12,000 years. So if you think about that, just think about that. Within 2 decades of removing people from this landscape, grasses are replaced by rainforest. So Palo and Mob were working this landscape, caring for this landscape continuously for 12,000 years, holding back the never-ending tide of rainforest expansion in this landscape where you get 3 metres of rainfall a year. Yeah? Phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. I ask anyone here to give me evidence of such longevity in landscape management influence on this earth that isn't Australian. Also, what happens across northern Tasmania at this time? Bang, the first catastrophic fires. People have been living in Launceston since 1799, I think it was, 1801 or something like that. And bang, they start to get fires. Okay, we see this on mainland. Unfortunate, it's unfortunate, but once again, Aboriginal massacres are a good indicator of disruption of traditional lifeways. Okay, I don't like using it, but it's powerful and it unsettles, okay, and gets you thinking. If you just look at the catastrophic fires in southeast Australia, they follow, and correlation isn't causation, we can call it David Hume for that and get all philosophical about it, but you get people removed or life patterns changed, you start to get catastrophic fires that are bad for country, bad for ecosystems, bad for people, bad for everything. Yeah, and I'll show you what happens to species diversity, or species extinctions, one of our big problems at the moment. Okay, so let's drill down into each one. Sorry, time goes the other way now. It's 1,000 years ago to present. This is in Croajingolong National Park. You can walk past this when you take the Croajingolong Wilderness Walk. Yeah? It's a 100-kilometre walk along East Gippsland coast, straight past Lake Elusive and straight past the other side I'm about to show you. Croajingolong Wilderness Walk, right, in Gunai-Kurnai country. Okay, look, here's eucalypts, and I've turned this into cover. So this is the amount of tree cover there is derived from pollen. As soon as local Southeast Australian Gippsland massacres occur, tree cover doubles. Eucalypts. Now, how flammable are eucalypts? They've banned planting eucalypts in Portugal because they spur catastrophic fires. Now, there's some debate about whether they actually do or not, but people are so aware of how absolutely flammable a eucalypt is okay? And once it does burn, it shoots out embers and spots fires kilometres away. They are dangerous, dangerous plants. And how idiotic that we're all brought up on a diet of give me a home among the gum trees, you know? How dangerous is that as a psyche? Let's crowd ourselves as one of, if not the most flammable trees on earth, yeah? And then wonder why our houses get burnt down. So double tree cover, and look what happens. This is charcoal, the one above it. You get the biggest fire to occur in this landscape in 1,000 years. Not only that, if you look at that very top plot there, that's erosion. What happens after big hot fires? You erode soil. That's when you know it's a real bad fire. Mob will tell you that's a bad fire. You know, you've done the wrong thing there. Okay, you can get punished for that. Yeah, you destroy country. First time in 1,000 years. Following the removal of people and their management, following a double of tree cover. Nature's not looking after itself in this context. Here's, sorry, I didn't change your picture. That's the same site. But this is Point Hicks, okay? Just some data that's just come in from my master's student, it's just finished. Eucalypts, okay? Massacres. I just cut this to 500 years, you know, so we could see things. Eucalypts increase. Fire increases, biggest peak in the last 3,000 years at that site. Same story, right? Big, hot fires. Buchan, you can go on and on, but this one's a bit later. This one shows, and you can read this paper from Alice Lamming in 2022 in the journal Fire. It's rattled the greeny beast, I'll tell you that. That this here, once settler burning, okay, who were there trying to mimic what Aboriginal people did for their own purposes, not actually replicating what mob do, which is spiritual, cultural, pragmatic, economic, just trying to get more green picked for their cows and keep things a bit safe. As soon as that was banned by the Land Conservation Council, trees up the top there more than double. You get these big charcoal peaks and the first evidence of that second plot down there, okay, of erosion. Right? And you get the shift from Von Gerard's landscape, which is open, to this crowded forest. It all verifies itself, okay, in the 1800s, from the start of this record to the end. Okay? So this is from the lock it up mentality. Lock it up, we've got to protect this area. And Howitt, in his book, I've forgotten what that book is called, you know, that yellow book, Southeastern something or other Australia. Yeah. He writes, he's walking through there in the 1800s, and he notes down, he says, this place has changed following the removal of Aboriginal burning. There is more fuel here, and there is more fire, and it is dangerous. This was recognised in the 1800s, okay? Here it was being maintained somewhat by settlers. That was banned, and you get these catastrophic fires. And you can see here I did an image analysis, let's not bother. So we got all these sites ranging from just under Byron Bay, or Evans Head, sorry, right through to Wallarong country down at Ocean Grove, okay? And we pile all these together, okay? And you can see here, well, there's the timing, right? You get massacres beginning. The next thing that goes are eucalypts. The next things that go are fire, okay? And this is a composition of fire from all across this landscape. Massacres, eucalypts increase, fires occur. Then you get climate change. This is the Leaning Tower Pisa thing. We're all worried about climate change. Has even seen the giant koala walking down the street scorched by the climate mob, you know? All this energy going into climate, and don't get me wrong, climate's having an influence, but we're not caring for country. You can't start a fire without fuel. Bruce Springsteen had it wrong, right? He said a spark. You can't start a fire without fuel, right? So we've let this landscape go. We've just let it go, and it's unsafe. Okay, and here's just a plot of that. Okay, really quick. It's a cultural problem, okay? We've got to go away from this mentality of fighting fire. Look at this should be our attitude to fire, but it's not, it's this, okay? It's this, scary, scary, fight, fight. We have paramilitary organisations, containment lines, sergeants, brigades. We are fighting a war. We're not embracing and loving, okay? That's a cultural problem. There's nothing wrong here. There's no need more science, put myself out of a job. We need to change the way we think about this. Even our heroes get involved, okay? they're paramilitary organisations, okay? And this is a British thing. Fire's bad in a big wooden city, yeah? It's bad, and it's bad in a place where plants aren't fire adapted, right? But you're not there anymore. Let it go. Elsa told you, right? So here, we've got to stop this divide, right? We've got to stop this divide. We've got to stop this footprint idea. Of course we have a footprint. We're here. We're a part of it. We've got to not stop thinking we just pull the levers, okay, and isolate things, okay? And what happens when you do? If you involve people, Aboriginal people, but all people, in caring for country, you get improvements in everything. Social cohesion, attendance at school, drug abuse, all these sorts of things improve. We know this empirically. We also know that if you burn, cultural burning, we don't scorch our koalas. We know, okay? If you look at our species loss began in 1790, had its fastest rate of loss before climate change. These are land use, landscape things, okay? And you could actually say climate change has been good for that. Yeah? It's not, but, so we've got to let go of this myth. We've got to remember it and take up our responsibility. So now we're hovering between Rio Tinto narcissists who just want to exploit and take. We've got your misanthropes, human-hating greenies. Okay, sorry, not all greenies. It's just, been having an issue with a few lately. That are dysfunctional. They neglect under the guise of care and locking up and protecting. And we neglect our middle ground of care for country and looking up and taking up our role and responsibility, led by mob, to show us all the way. In caring for country. I think I made it.
Oh, goodness. And we are very lucky to have Uncle Dave joining for the next panel, which I'm sure will continue on this theme. So it's what a treat we have. But I assume they've got lots of questions in the audience. I've seen a couple on my app. I wasn't looking at my phone, earlier. I was just looking at my, but yes, we've got a lot of great questions here, but I wonder if there's any in the audience that wants to raise their hand. We've got a microphone, and then we'll invite two people to join us in responding to your very thought-provoking presentation.
Thanks so much, Ripper presentation. I'm wondering what you think about the recent nature market bill that's been put forth and whether for biodiversity certificates, and do you think that fire management in terms of sort of this protection of biodiversity issue a certificate, what about using traditional owner fire management practices and getting that across the line as a biodiversity methodology?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I don't like the whole nature climate solution thing. I think it's a lot of what we're expecting. So, for example, the world is obsessed with planting trees. Obsessed, right? And what a bad place to do that, right? And what you see after, just in terms of carbon, I'll just answer this in terms of carbon and biodiversity. Australia, I didn't know this until I went to a carbon thing and I had to start thinking about it. Australia's main carbon output, more than fossil fuels, more than everything, is fire. It's carbon release from fire. Full stop. That's our biggest carbon output, right? After the Black Summer 2019-2020 fires, that doubled our carbon output, right? So we're thinking about planting all these trees, all this, and rewilding. We've already had a rewilding experiment. It was called the British Invasion, right? And that carbon is not secure. Those forests now will have trouble securing carbon for a decade or two. They'll be net negative, while things recover, many of them, okay? And it's all just being pumped back out. So there's letting nature, okay, and having this focus on nature solutions is just wrong-headed. And it just perpetuates this idea that we are in some way separate from nature. I mean, the whole notion here, I hope I don't stir too many pots here, but the whole thing about talking about urban and nature as two different things, or it's just quasi-religious. It is. It's just carried from religion that separates us from the world around us and perpetuates this idea that we are in some way separate. Now, everything we do, ergo, is natural because we are a part of nature. You're either responsible or irresponsible. Yeah? So we've got to step away from this myth because it sets us apart. Okay, so these natural solutions have to be biocultural, or cultural solutions would be a better one, but it doesn't have the gravitas. People can't offset their guilt, by paying humans to do things because they think humans are the bad things. So there's a lot we've got to reconcile in here before we go out there.
I can add lots of wheels turning. Well, I might ask one from here. I know you've sort of touched on this just now, but there is this question about that, how do we incorporate a lot of what you're talking about into our cities, and what are some of the terminology they might use? So if it's not rewilding, which if it's renaturing, I don't know, what's your, how do you help us to bring nature into the city, but using the terminology that you think we should be using?
Yeah, I mean, in one way, terminology doesn't matter, but it actually does. You know, they've done cultural burning in the middle of Adelaide recently, you know. So, I mean, and I've got this, you know, Martin Luther King, I've got a dream, you know, I've got this idea, you know, when you drive out and you see all those, the green area between highways, and they drive this big mower in and they can't get in there because it's too big and they just leave it, looks crap. Why aren't we getting people to burn all that sort of stuff? You know, you go up to top end and you see people burning their nature strips, all this sort of stuff. So we've set ourselves up against nature. You know, I think once again, it just requires rethinking. We've got to live with the fact that we've got, and I love them, those plane trees. You know, I'm not saying cut down all the foreign stuff and put in the natural stuff, but stop this core idea that here isn't nature, or whatever you want to think is the outside world, is the first step. And the rest is relative semantics, but sometimes semantics, as I've displayed today, have really powerful outcomes and problematic outcomes. So.
Starting with caring for the country seems like a good place to change the way that we're talking about it. Yeah. But if you're able to join us on the panel over here, there's more time to ask questions for Michael-Shawn Fletcher, but we have Dave Kendal and David Smith to join us on the panel now. We've got Dave Kendal, who's the Director of Future in Nature, and David Smith as he's a forest pathologist or an entomologist from ArborCarbon. Here we go. And we'll allow you both to respond to their amazing presentation that we just had now. If you've got a couple of minutes each to respond and provide your own opinion on the myth. Again, we don't all have to agree, let's hear your perspective.
Yeah, so thanks, Michael. It's a real privilege to be on the stage next to you here, I think. For me, as some of you know, I've just moved back from Tassie, so it's great to be back on Wiradjuri country, and I want to pay my respects to elders, past, present and emerging, and it's the Wathaurong country is really important to me too, so I've spent a lot of time in Ballarat and reconnecting. It's great to be here, so thanks, and thanks to the City of Melbourne for organising this. I think the two big take-away messages for me from seeing such a powerful and great talk is recognising how much our landscapes change over time. So in our very short-term thinking, we think of them as very fixed. So whether that's through the natural ecosystems that we manage or the plant trees that are out the front, these are all really short-term. Or thinking of these as static landscapes is a short-term understanding of the world. So things change a lot. The second part is recognising how important people and the cultural management is. So all management is cultural. The challenge for us, and maybe from a Western way of thinking about it, the challenge is how do we choose what to do, and how do we know how to achieve those outcomes. So seeing confidence in being able to manage landscapes is completely inspiring. And the challenge for everyone in the room is to work out, for each of us, in all of our cultural diversity, how do we work out what to do, and then develop the skills and expertise to be able to do it. So thanks.
Yeah, it's been hard to follow that, to be honest. It's on? Yep. It is hard to follow that, but from an entomologist pathology perspective, I've been studying forest insects in native forest out in the bush for the last 20 years. And some of the biggest changes we've seen is actually impacts of big outbreaks and the way that things are being managed differently. So you can go to some areas where there have been light fires, and following on from the fire scenario is that where you have light fires, you have insect population build up within in the canopies, but also that canopy starts off normally in the subsoil and the litter. And if you maintain your understory species or even encourage new growth with different range of species to increase biodiversity, then you actually can also maintain or have a better understanding of the pest populations. And one example, for instance, is actually up in the high country, we had a big outbreak of stick insects, and everyone loves a stick insect, but these guys were actually defoliating large amounts of forest. And the way that was actually managed was actually putting through a fire. and that actually reduced the egg bed. And then the following few years, we actually had no insects. And we find that some of the areas which have been locked up, the pest population actually builds up too high, and it's very hard for the biologicals to actually then find that midpoint between those. So there's things that we need to maintain our forests, and there's also things that we need to leave them alone, but also because some of the things that we do impact on the biocontrols. But also we just got to make sure that we're doing it in a respectful way. If we go one way or the other, we find that this is imbalance in the system. And that respect is also in the urban landscape. If we don't manage our plane trees or whatever, we're actually going to, we may increase the pest population, where if we're managing them appropriately, looking at them and monitoring them, making sure they're nutritionally full, and they actually can maintain themselves, but we are managing that. We're not just allowing them to just use the soil that's there.
Would you like to add to the conversation at all?
Oh, no, there's a lot I'm thinking of. One of the issues, I think, is resourcing and scale, to your point, is that we have fewer people looking at big maps and drawing big management areas. So I've got an issue with the word management, full stop. I mean, you don't manage your family, do you? What do? You care for your family.
Sure.
Management is a hierarchical term that involves a kind of a master-servant relationship. You won't hear Aboriginal people, we're forced into the sort of the language of management, but it's care, So, but we're caring or managing these huge parcels with single treatments, if you want to use a bit of scientific thing. Whereas they've been managed or cared at smaller bits. Yeah. And then you get those little areas of refuge and and that over there might be burnt for 500, 600 years and And then, because we're doing these, we're allowing such large areas to change in a uniform way. Monocultures, we hate monocultures when they're agriculture, but we love monocultures when they're our forests, So then they're exposed to the dangers that are huge.
Yeah, and the insect populations then build up because we have that monoculture.
Yeah, and and you would have experienced this in Tassie when around Geeveston, those big fires, and there's all this, all the mountain ashes destroyed. That got there because of fire. Mountain ash is this weird thing that they get in there and you leave them alone for anywhere from 100 to 1,000 years, but they've got to burn again, So there's these kind of, the scale and the understanding are all wrong, I think. And so we have to sort of move beyond that. And I think that the perfect way is through looking at it from a different perspective, an Aboriginal perspective. If you think about it, it really dawned on me when I was working out with Gunnar and Glowak, and their offices in Forrico. Is it Forrico? Forrico? Forestec, yep. Which is out near Lakes Entrance. And you're just driving past, just for mile upon mile, kilometre upon kilometre of forest and And I started thinking, mob live much smaller lives, and you'd be working on that side of the hill and that side of the hill. So we're just going over so much difference that we just now consider a homogeneous unit, that we call the Croajingong National Park, So I think there's a whole range of issues there. And the big one's money. It's always money, because now it's all remote sensing, soil dryness index, get out there, burn that, didn't work, go to that, plan another year in advance, got to do it in autumn between this date and this date, and, miss that, So you've got to break apart the whole thing. There's a whole lot of barriers. And the one thing that's not missing, despite, and this is another myth we could tackle, the knowledge is not missing. The knowledge is sitting here. The knowledge is sitting in people who, just to put it in context, for 200 years have either been beaten, starved, killed for expressing culture and knowledge. And now we're enlightened ecologists saying, hey, we need you. What do you know? It's either up you or, I'm not really that comfortable doing this. So the way forward in that and in bringing out the knowledge is just sitting down, building a relationship with people. Because we're in a transactional society right now where I can download any bit of information I want and apply it wherever I want. Doesn't work in our culture. You've got to sit down, earn trust, empower people, and understand that you're actually tackling here 250 years of colonisation and disempowerment in order to...
I'm excited that we're here talking face to face again. This is such a relief after the last few years. So things like this are really the start of a conversation. I guess, can I ask a question too, which is, for those of us who work in urban systems where we've got traditional owners, but there's, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander diaspora, so there's people from all different lands across Australia here in Melbourne, First Nations people from all around the world, and many different cultures. How do we bring people together to live those cultural and spiritual lives in ways that enrich nature and respect all of these different perspectives?
Yeah, tough, hey. Well, the 4-day work week might help. So that really, we're all so busy, and we all have to do it yesterday. Dave and I had a relationship for 2 years before I started working on Bowl and Billabong. I wasn't in a rush, I understand, but I can afford to do that because of X, Y, and Z, hard work in the past and all this. So we've got to temper our expectations, understand that. And the other thing people do is they go, I've gone to Aboriginal community because I want to do this, but they're not interested. It's probably because they're trying to feed their kids, and and they're not interested in not disparaging entomology, but a stick insect's wings or something. But if you sit down and talk to them and build a relationship, they will be in some level interested in that and be happy to do the work. But it's just we've got to move away from this transactional. And I had this at the Melbourne Writers thing on Sunday. A person asked me, I knew they asked out of ignorance and not get angry. But it's like, what if we can't sit down? How do we get this information? I said, well, maybe you don't deserve it, Just because, and we're in this society now where we think just because we want to know something, it is our right to know that thing. And this and the university is a real problem for this because we just package up all this knowledge and send it out as, like from the ivory tower to benefit society. And we forget that, knowledge sometimes is earned, it's trusted, it's handed over at certain times, it's only empowered to certain people. And you think, that's ridiculous, all that mumbo jumbo, let's just get it in. Well, no, this place was successfully cared for, lived in and prospered on for a long time. And a lot of the problems we're dealing with now are the disintegration of that philosophy and way of life. And every attempt I've seen, there's been very few attempts that have been made, urban and extra urban, that have actually succeeded. We've still got salinised soils, we're still losing species, we've still got fires, we're still stuffing things up, left, right and centre. So we actually have to sit down and just trying to rewrite the book on the way we do it. So I'd suggest if you're expecting it to roll out in 2024, put it back to 2026 and work hard at building those relationships for those at that time.
I'm going to let Dave jump in. So I know it's complicated with two Daves, but there's a lot of questions on here, I think mostly for you, Michael, particularly like now we're taking on your well-crafted arguments and how do we actually articulate that or go forward with that in an urban context. So there's lots of questions there. We'll see if we can get to some of them, but particularly questions around, but how do you have those conversations if you don't have the relationships? And I think of a lot of colleagues of mine, be that Stan Louis or Madison Miller, it's like the best day to start those relationships is today. If you don't have any, then, start. It's not, if you don't have, then, go forth. But Dave, did you want to add in?
Well, just linking into that whole bringing people together and actually working with their land, is that we know that one of my colleagues is working in myrtle rust up in northern New South Wales and also into Queensland, and so they're actually working on the ground with people, with country, and then working out how they can deal with that new outbreak of myrtle rust with country, and then how do they look for how we actually deal with the natural processes, how do we deal with it on the land, how do we actually, this new exotic disease is going to change our landscape, how do we now put those old aspects into, how can we manage the land better? And it's going to be the same. I'm a pathologist, I work in biosecurity and how we manage that. So the biggest threat from my point of view, and I'll sort of jump in before we go to other questions, is about, from my perspective, is how we manage the land better with everybody, but also looking forward to what's the next thing from I'm doing risk analysis all the time about what's the next thing that's going to come into the country because we've got this big import risk that's coming in, how we manage that holistically to understand how we're going to do it the way we think to do it, but also how we do it on country at the same time, because it's going to be quite different. Because those pests will attack different species totally different. It might be an urban landscape tree, but it might be a native species. And how does that change the landscape, and how do we work with the landscape with that?
Yeah, I don't think I'm qualified to speak to necessarily how we mitigate the potential of pathogens and other things to destroy country. But what I do know, and I think this applies, or it's a simple systems theory really, resilient systems are resilient, and healthy systems are resilient. And I think one of the things that we mistake or where we go wrong is that resilient or healthy country is often whittled down to biophysical attributes, tree cover, soil depth, da-da-da-da-da. Whereas that's only part of the story. We've got a project now with the Indigenous Knowledge Institute and Maddie, who's actually driving it, Maddie Miller, a Darug woman. Well, she's on maternity leave now, thankfully. Where we're sitting down with Aboriginal community, not non-Aboriginal community, and yarning with them about what they think healthy country is. And more than half of the metrics that you will get are actually human ones, emotive, smells, these kinds of things. And we're constantly pulling ourselves out and managing this thing, whereas if you actually insert and care or manage, whatever the word is you want to use, to those things, how do we feel in this landscape? What are the smells and sounds? And you talk to mob who do burning, and if you burn right, that smoke hasn't got your PM3s that are going to give you cancer. That's actually bush medicine. You burn the right things, and there's actually a salt bush out there that people use. If you inhale it, it cures. I think it's asthma or one of these things. It's just sort of earmarked as one of these next therapeutic things. So I think our starting point's wrong, and if we can create healthy country and map healthy country now that we know that there's, we've got to live with it, Dave. There's only 4% mob in this country, so we're sharing it with 96% others. So it's got to be a collective, what do we expect healthy and want from healthy country? Because I often hear this, what do we do, what do we do, what do we do, what do we do, with very little concentration on what do we want, and we can't just rewind the clock. That's not my point here. My point isn't, landscapes aren't museums. I've got your really great point about change. What is it? Heraclitus, the Greek philosopher, in change, the earth finds rest, So we are in a dynamic thing. How do we set up some expectations of country, manage it to be healthy, and then you hope, there's going to be something out of the box like a cane toad, you hope that resilient system has a better internal defence to some of these external things.
Well, going back to the myrtle rust one, talking about doing low-level burns and maintaining, so you're not getting a canopy buy-in, you're not getting a lot of epicormic growth growing up. Myrtle rust it likes new growth. And so one of the biggest problems we've got in East Gippsland at the moment is the large amount of defoliation and devastation from the fires in 1920. And we've just found myrtle rust in Gippsland for the first time since we first identified it back in 2012. So we don't know what that impact's going to be, and with the large amount of defoliation and also a large amount of epicormic growth in that area, what's that going to look like in the future? And I'd love to be able to work with people to find out what that's going to look like. But in the future, those smaller areas that we burn a low level and really cool fires actually benefits us because the pathogen doesn't affect old growth, old leaves. That doesn't mean leave old growth forest. It means older leaves, different parts of the tree will be affected by different pathogens at different times of the day. How do we manage that better, working with those systems that we have in place, or can learn off you guys?
Yeah.
I'm thinking how much of a segue these questions that are on here for the session coming up with Uncle Dave. So no, there's a lot of questions. I'm not sure if you do want to respond because people are thinking, well, now that we do have these eucalyptums and now we do have these trees that are not necessarily been brought in or planted with the sense of country as the purpose, but now we have them in our cities. What is your solution, I guess, seeing as a lot of those trees are, bringing in biodiversity that we're wanting, or wildlife is, being attracted in or retaining in our cities, which is what we're wanting to see. I'm not sure. Yeah,
is it interesting?
It's a classic question.
Yeah. No,
what is it you're wanting us to do?
Just love them. I love trees.
Yeah.
Love them. There's if you go to Central Australia, right? I think it's Arunti people. I can't remember who it is, but in their dreaming stories are cats. We're the one, modern society is the one that fixes things as museums. No, it's not natural. It's got to be chuk, 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 chuk. There's this, things change. Species come in, species come out. So we have to understand we're in a new complex. It doesn't mean that we can't apply these deeper fundamental principles of putting ourselves in there and caring, not just standing back and letting go. So I have no problem with invasives. I think we actually, except for the dangerous ones, we actually spend inordinate amount, too much money on trying to eradicate and control because humans are control freaks. No, that species doesn't belong there. Let's spend $1 million on hawkweed or whatever it is, and it's probably a bad thing, so I'm probably picked on something that's worth doing. But, I think that we've got to let it go. Just keep going back to frozen.
I think on that note, let's thank Dave, David and Michael for the discussion now.